Hello, my name is J.D. Miller, and I am an author, a father, a veteran, and a Christian, although not necessarily in that order of importance. The reason that I am bringing this to you today is that on this channel, I am going to be presenting my book, Imago, The Red Castle, for you to listen to for free. I will be doing dramatic readings of it over the next several weeks. But I thought that the best way to start, honestly, would be to tell you a little bit more about myself. And the most important thing about myself is my faith, my Christianity. So I decided that rather than to launch into the book immediately as a way of introduction, I would tell you about my testimony, about how I nearly lost my faith, and how in the end I came back to it, and it saved me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, if there's anything that's more important in my life than my Christianity, well, there's nothing more important than my Christianity, than my faith. And so this is the best way to begin the journey. Now, when I was very young, I remember going to the Methodist church here in town with my family, particularly Sunday school. Now, I don't remember exactly when my family stopped, but I'm assuming it was first grade or so. And my dad was a farm kid. He grew up on he was actually born in a sod house, if you can believe that. If you don't know what a sod house is, S-O-D, go look it up. He went to a one-room schoolhouse for a while until he got into high school, and then he got to go into town. He actually rode a horse to school when he was very little. True. Funny story that not many people can say that their fathers did that. Now, I think we went to church really because Dad was a farm kid, and because that was part of the daily life for them. Now, outside of church, we never really spoke about church. We never talked about or performed prayer individually or as a family. And we never talked about the importance of trying to get closer to God or Christ or what it meant to us. And I don't think that was really unusual for families like mine, for men of my age. I'm right in the middle of Gen X. I was 10 in 1980 and 20 in 1990, so all of my teen years were really from the 80s till the 90s. Like I said, I don't think that's unusual for families like mine to just suddenly stop going to church. A lot of people I know, a lot of my friends have the exact same memory. They went to church when they were younger, and then it seemed like everyone sort of stopped all at the same time. Now, even though I was a big reader, I didn't even own a Bible, not even a kid's Bible. But now I should say that this is not an indictment of my father or my family. I had a very happy, normal childhood growing up. It was great, but I came out of it believing, as most people believe today, that if there is anything beyond the normal world that we see, if there is any greater supernatural force, then if you were a good person, you went to heaven, on the whole. If you were a bad person, you went to hell. I think a majority of the world, no matter what faith they claim that they are, still believe that. But my first real interaction with true faith was with my friend Carter Schultz. Carter was an actual Christian, and he walked the walk, even from a very young age, more so than anyone else that I knew growing up. From grade school through high school, he was the real deal. He and I became friends in second and third grade when we were playing summer baseball together. And I went to church with him when I would spend the night at his house, because they went every Sunday. And because of my going to church with him, that really bolstered my curiosity. And through Carter, I came to understand and believed in the Holy Trinity, that Jesus was the Son of God, that Christ was resurrected for our sins. And that was the first time I made a conscious choice for God, the first time I really started to believe it. Now, granted, that was the conscious choice of a fourth and fifth grader, and with all of the implications that go along with that. But that was the beginning of any glimmer of faith in my life. Now, from grade school through junior high, I think I really tried to be a better Christian, and I tried to emulate Carter in a lot of ways. But when I got into high school, things changed a little bit. Now, I know my conviction wasn't really very durable. I was a jock after all, and I was more concerned with being one of the cool kids than I was with adhering to faith. Now, I wasn't a bad kid or a wild kid. Any teacher of mine that you would have asked would have said that I was a good kid. I never smoked. I never did drugs. I never set anything on fire. I never stole a car. But I did get up to the kind of shenanigans that a lot of high schoolers did back then, and that is, partying, drinking, and using any excuse that I could to not be faithful. In other words, I would never defend, I would shed my faith anytime it wasn't convenient, and that was most of the time. Now, all this time I still believed in God, I still believed in Christ and his resurrection, but my faith was just weak and watery. I could and easily did discard any conviction that I had if it got in the way of a good time. Drinking or having sex or just behaving like an idiot. Now, heaven forbid that I would ever defend Christianity to anyone or any of my peers. I could talk the talk, like I said, at the right time and place, but that was it. I went to church a bit during my high school years, certainly not often. And I thought I was a good Christian in spite of my actions. But after high school, I went into college for a little while, a couple of years, and I got bored with it. And I joined the military in the early 90s. I was trained as a combat medic, but fortunately I was never in combat. And my 4 years in the service were, interesting, but uneventful. I did find a church to attend when I was in North Carolina, and I went sporadically. And I made some friends, some true Christians there whom I still have contact with. And my faith grew then a little bit more, and although I may have been getting a little closer to truth faith, I was still a long ways off the mark. Now, I got out of the service and I came home, and I very soon met a girl who was in America on vacation. Now, we worked together on my friend's cattle ranch for the summer, and we took tourists on fake cattle drives. We'd take his cows and we'd push them up the hill. Sometimes we'd spend the night at our teepee camp, and then we'd come back down in the morning. It's just like the movie City Slickers, right? And she and I fell in love, and we got married, and she was not a Christian. And I knew that, but I wasn't looking for that. I thought it would be all right. I was in love, and I thought we were an eternal match. I actually thought that fate, i.e. God, brought us together because the odds of us meeting some beautiful European girl from Holland, meeting me right when I got out of the service back in Colorado, I thought that this was meant to be. And I thought that, that she would fall in line with my faith, right, over time. Yeah. Can you see a foreshadowing here? Like I said, she was from Holland, and after 5 years in America here in my hometown, and the birth of my first son, she decided she wanted to move back to Holland. I thought that was a bad idea. I didn't speak the language. We had a toddler. We both have to find jobs and a place to live. But she talked me into it, or shall we say I lost that argument, and we moved to Holland, where we lived for 5 long, horrible, terrible years. Now, Holland is a very secular country. Apathetic to Christianity, I guess you could say. Sort of a mix of spiritual but not religious and pagan/atheists, to be honest. I have never, ever in my life had as many people ask me what my zodiac sign was as I did in Holland. As I said, my wife wasn't a Christian, and though she was sympathetic to my beliefs, she wasn't really interested. And obviously, therefore, she wasn't of any help when my faith came under fire. She, like most people, believed that if you were mostly a good person, you end up going to heaven or the happy hunting grounds or whatever. And the faith that I thought I had, that was always in the background, was challenged deeply. I was confronted for the first time by aggressive atheists, by my atheist coworkers and an atheist boss who would laugh at the very idea of God. And they asked me questions that I had no answer for. If there's a God, why is there evil? Don't you know that evolution and science have disproved God? All you Americans are just a bunch of bumpkins and unsophisticated and gullible and not like us Europeans. We're worldly and cultured. And now that I look back on that, That's a bigger laugh than anything else that happened to me over there, anything else anyone said to me. But, being surrounded and constantly bombarded with these ideas was beginning to batter down my defenses, which I admit were never really very strong in the first place because I'd never been challenged. Now, because I never had a deep faith and was never challenged, but just sort of drifted along, I never had any real reason to seek any answers for any of these difficult questions. I didn't ask them myself. Now, by this time, my second son was born in Holland, and I realized how important these questions were to me, the answers to these questions, and I had no anchor. I had nothing to fall back on. It began to affect me deeply, and I had never, ever in my life felt so alone and adrift. I had no friends to talk to, certainly no Christian friends, and I was a stranger in a strange land, even after several years. A fish out of water. If there was no God, what was the point to life anymore? Without God, it all seemed to be meaningless. I fell into a deep depression, and on top of that, I developed some sort of weird condition. My right knee was swelling up like a grapefruit, and my right foot was killing me, and my right wrist had become so painful I could barely use my hand. I could barely shift gears in the car. I couldn't even pick up and hold my sons. I could barely hobble around the house or at work. And after seeing doctors for nearly a year and being misdiagnosed for nearly a year, not one doctor, not one, had any clue what was wrong with me. I was literally afraid that I had some degenerative joint disease and that I was dying. I'd had all kinds of tests for arthritis and cancer and what have you, and nothing ever came back positive. And I was afraid that that's how my sons would remember me, just some cripple in a wheelchair who couldn't even play with them as they got older. If I died in Holland, and this was a huge fear of mine, if I died in Holland, then there was no way my sons would ever return to America. They would grow up in Holland, and they would be stuck there. And that was the most horrifying threat I could think of. I was at the lowest ebb of my life. Well, I got fired from my job, and that might have saved us because it gave us the impetus to move back to America after 5 years. Work is very hard to find in Europe, and I talked my wife into returning because I pointed out that I could easily find a job back home. And when we returned, the strange problem with my joints began to heal, although slowly. And being separated from the atheist landscape and the gravitational pull of the pagans was also good. I was on the mend. I was on the mend spiritually as well as physically. And although it was a near thing, I never lost my faith completely. In fact, a dogged part of me was thinking that I should be determined to hold on to my belief like a terrier holds on to a rat, maybe just to be a gadfly to those who thought that I was a fool. I was determined not to ever give up on the belief that God was real, though I was full of doubt, and it was still tormenting me. It had caused a lot of damage, spiritual damage, shall we say. But everything began to get better being home again. My sons were 4 and 8 when we returned, and they were thriving in America, and I was certainly happier. I found work immediately, but after being back for a little over 2 years in the States, my wife decided she didn't want to be married anymore, and she left me. This was also devastating. This was worse than anything I'd ever experienced. I really hadn't recovered my faith. This was another blow to me, and I'd reached a whole new low. I didn't know what I had been working for if I didn't have a whole family. Thoughts of suicide rambled through my head, though I never actually came close to doing it. I thought about it quite a bit. And on top of this, while I was still trying to deal psychologically with my divorce, my father, whom I had been taking care of for a couple of years after that, died. My dad wasn't well, and I knew it was coming. But even though I knew it was coming, it affected me deeply. More deeply than I thought it would. Things were not going well. I was now questioning my own mortality. But somehow, in spite of all of this that happened, I began to rediscover my faith. But not the watery faith of my youth, but true, a strong faith. I found a lot of the help that I needed on YouTube. I found the Christianity that I really needed. I found the answers that I needed. Now, there were brilliant Christian apologists and philosophers like Frank Turek, like philosopher William Lane Craig, like Oxford mathematician John Lennox, brain surgeon Michael Egnor, Pastor Greg Laurie, Stephen C. Meyer, who is the founder for the Center of Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute, among many others. So, although we all know that the internet is a portal into a world of darkness and perversion, there are some good things to be had there as well. It all depends on where you look and how you look. And I believe that God was leading me. Now, I was finding answers to my questions and arguments for my faith. My belief in God was planted again in fertile soil, and I was growing in sound argument and logic. And I had answers for those questions that had befuddled and nearly destroyed me. Now, we've been back in America for almost 20 years. And I can say that my new found born-again faith is stronger than I ever could have thought possible. I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. My two adult sons, live with me here at my house, and they are both very committed Christians. We go to church together every Sunday, and my days and nights are full of peace and a love and a reverence for God and His Son, Jesus Christ, that I didn't know would ever be possible. I was even baptized in the river that flows in front of my house 3 years ago. 3.5 years ago now. And that is my story in a nutshell. As I said, my faith is extremely important to me. And so you will be hearing more about that as I record chapters from my book. More than anything, my book doesn't preach, but I hope it entertains. And so now with this done, I present to you Imago, the Red Castle.